What's up, guys? This is a follow up from my last video about if you should sell your gold for Bitcoin. And let me say this up front. All right. First of all, everybody's portfolio is different. Stack what you like. Do what you got to do. I'm just here to give you the truth, the information that I watch, and looking at things from a different perspective. Because again, guys, once we get into an asset or savings technology or whatever, we tend to be very favorable to that, and we listen to only that asset, people that are into that asset. But I tell you, man, I'm a type of person that kicks the tires a lot, and I look for things that are wrong. And when I first got into Bitcoin, I was very skeptical of it, and I didn't believe it, and I looked into it with an eye of let's see what I can find wrong. And the more and more I looked, the more and more I liked. But we're going to take a look at a video by Matthew Kratter from Bitcoin University of why we shouldn't go back to a gold standard. Back our fiat currency with gold and stuff like that. Why it's a bad idea, and I couldn't agree more. I've said this many times. It sounds good, but again, you got to trust human beings. So let's get on into this video and let's see what Matthew Kratter from Bitcoin University has to say about not going back to the gold standard.
This is Matthew Kratter from Bitcoin University, and today I wanted to talk a little bit about this idea of bringing back the gold standard. This is something I've been seeing with increasing frequency in my YouTube comment section. I don't want to call anyone out in particular and embarrass them, but I think this is a really bad idea, bringing back the gold standard. It's an idea that's been put forward by people like Peter Schiff and other gold bugs who say that soon the world's going to go off a dollar standard and return to the gold standard. You have the various BRICS countries talking about issuing a new currency that's somehow linked with gold or backed with gold. And I think people who propose this really are not familiar with history or with gold's properties. For example, we've talked about this before, but the BRICS currency being backed by gold, how this would work is these various countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, they would issue paper and or digital tokens, probably mostly digital tokens that are backed one-to-one with physical gold, stored in a safe somewhere. And again, this is the problem. Which country do you store the gold in? Do you store more of it in one country or more of it in another country? Who gets to guard the safes or the vaults where the gold is being stored? How often should you check to see if the gold is still in that safe and hasn't been replaced with gold-coated tungsten bars in the middle of the night? And then who gets to check these checkers who are checking on the gold? Who gets to check the people who are checking the checkers, etc.? Why should the South Africans trust the Russians? Why should the Russians trust the Chinese? And you have all these cultural differences between these various countries. But what makes it even worse is just the physical properties of gold. Why should other countries too trust these BRICS countries not to issue more money tokens than they have gold backing it? This, for example, as we've talked about, is what the U.S. did to the world in the 1960s when we printed more U.S. dollars to pay for Vietnam and welfare projects, guns and butter, than we had gold to back it. France then sent over a warship in the late 60s to exchange their U.S. dollars for gold, and then Nixon had to fold and close the gold convertibility window in 1971, and this was the birth of the modern fiat money era. Gold's basic physical properties ensure that all attempts and reattempts at a gold standard will end badly.
It always ends badly because you can't trust human beings. And it's funny when you listen to the gold and silver bugs, like I know you guys all do, and I do too, about the BRICS nations going to basically a fiat currency backed by by gold and stuff like that. And I laugh when I hear that because, as you'll see in this video, again, it's just a bad idea theoretically and objectively. You just got to look at things objectively and not see the world the way we want to see it. Of course, I'm a silver stacker. Of course, I would love for silver to go to the moon. Literally to the moon. $200-300 an ounce, gold at $5,000 an ounce, and just everything's backed by that, and everybody, playing the game right. But the problem is you have to trust human beings, and they can't be trusted, guys. You cannot trust a custodian to hold the tokens or the gold or the silver or whatever and issue out tokens. So when I hear the gold and silver bugs talking about the BRICS nations and backing up with gold, and this is why gold is going up and silver is going up, it's just like, guys, I go to these coin shops all the time, man. And yeah, the market goes up and down. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. But, I remember last year it was like, oh man, we're running out of silver now. The coin shops are running out of cash because everybody's selling their silver and gold. You know what I mean? The market's flooded with it. Again, if it's so valuable, why are so many people selling it? I'm not saying it's not. You know what I mean? Is it because people are not waking up? Why with inflation being high and stuff like that, why aren't more people stacking gold and silver? And again, guys, we can't look at the world the way we want it to be. We have to look at the world the way it is.
In fact, the gold standard actually started failing well before 1971 when Nixon took the U.S. off the gold standard. We had a lot of countries loosely going off the gold standard in order to finance World War I. And we also had Executive Order 6102 in 1933 when President Franklin Roosevelt confiscated common Americans' gold. And if it was sitting in a bank, the U.S. government confiscated it. If it wasn't sitting in a bank, you had to turn it in. And some people went to jail or had very high fines if they didn't do this. What they basically did is they would buy your gold from you for, I believe it was something like $20 an ounce. And then as soon as the U.S. government had collected as much gold as they could, they revalued it to $33 an ounce. And in this way, really stole from the American people. And this is how the gold ended up in Fort Knox, assuming that it's actually still there. So this was an early example of the gold standard already breaking and the government doing funny business with it, even before 1971.
Yeah, we know what Roosevelt did in 1933 by confiscating the gold. Now, full disclosure, I don't think they're going to do that again, to be honest with you, but I do think they're going to keep printing money at a record pace. With this debt ceiling bill that they signed, from the time they signed it until January 2025, they're just going to print unbelievably. We have no ceiling on it, right? So we've been obviously debasing the currency since 1913, since the Fed was in 1944 with the Bretton Woods Agreement, when they decided the U.S. dollar was going to be the world reserve currency. 1971 was just they just made it official. It's almost like a husband and wife that have been cheating on each other the whole time for years and years and years, and they just finally got a divorce. They didn't get a divorce that day in 1971. They've been getting a divorce for years. We've been divorcing from the gold, since 1913 at a slow pace, and now even faster now. You know what I mean? And they're going to keep doing it. So let's see what he says the problem with gold is and why we shouldn't have a gold standard.
The two fundamental problems with gold are the problems of custody or storage and transportation. So for example, custody, it's nice to have a safe place to store your gold besides your house, and especially if you have a certain amount of wealth, storing it in your house becomes increasingly impractical and turns your house into a honeypot.
Not gonna lie, that part hit me hard when they talk about turning your house into a honeypot. Yeah. When you got a lot of precious metals, especially silver, I know we're talking about gold, but silver is the poor man's gold. You got to think about custody, man. It's because it's physical. You know what I mean? And again, I believe we should have both. I believe we should have a physical money and a digital money. But I'm not gonna lie. The more and more I'm looking at Bitcoin, the more and more less I'm believing that. But you got to keep it safe. And it costs money to keep it safe. Let's see what he has to say about that.
But using a third-party custodian like a bank to store your gold introduces counterparty risk. The bank may not redeem your gold when you want it, or the government may steal it in an Executive Order 6102-like situation. When it comes to transportation, it's also not practical for quite wealthy people to move their gold across space. So I'll take a very traditional historical example. If I'm a wealthy merchant living in Florence during the Renaissance, or shortly thereafter, and I want to buy some nice Venetian glass from Murano in Venice, it's much easier to get my local Florentine bank where I store my gold and ask them to send a messenger by horseback with a piece of paper to a bank in Venice, which then agrees to give me credit with that Venetian glass seller merchant. If the wealthy merchants in Florence had had Bitcoin, of course, they could have just sent that Bitcoin directly to the glass merchant without needing intermediaries and paper certificates. And this is the problem with gold. A system based on physical gold will always devolve into a system of paper IOUs, digital or paper IOUs, simply because of gold's physical properties. And people who suggest a return to the gold standard must not understand this.
And that's a good point, because again, with Bitcoin, there's no third-party intermediaries, meaning I could zap it to you or you could zap it to me without anybody's permission, and it gets right to you. So if he wants to buy that stuff that he was talking about, he could have just zapped it right to him instead of sending him a paper. Now, we're talking about a hypothetical gold standard, because remember, you're not going to move gold around. Gold is going to sit in a vault, and you're going to have paper that's backed by that gold, a promissory note, a fiat currency, whatever, and you're going to hand it over to them. The problem is you have to trust somebody to hold that gold, right? And if you're not trusting anybody, you got to hold it yourself, right? And then the people that are holding it in the Fed or the U.S. government, you got to hope to God that they're keeping it safe, that it's really in there, and they're not printing out more papers than there is gold.
Here's another way that gold fails, another gold failure mode. I pay my bank an annual fee to store my physical gold. And as I said, if you're really wealthy with physical gold, the only two options are using a bank or some other security setup like that, or creating a small private army, having your own castle, etc., which comes with its own problems, because then you have to worry about the army turning on you and killing you when you sleep, and you have to worry about paying them, and it can become very expensive, etc., etc. So that gets complicated very quickly. We can see why there was market demand for banks to store gold and other things. But this is what happens. This is another gold failure mode. If that bank where I'm storing my gold and I'm paying them an annual fee, maybe I'm paying them 1% of the value of the gold to store it for 1 year. If that bank has a competitor that instead lends out its depositors gold for a fee, then that competitor bank is able to offer a reduced or zero annual storage fee. So I'm currently storing my gold at 1% a year. Maybe I'll move it to this competitor bank where they will store it for me for free or for 0.5% a year. And in this way, those competitor banks will steal all the business from the conservative banks that are very careful with the gold and don't lend it out. And then you'll end up with a system where you only have partial reserve gold banks, where all of them are lending out to other banks in order to earn interest income to subsidize the storage costs and gain market share. And when this happens, if you have a situation like an economic contraction and a lot of people ask for their gold at the same time in this context of a fractional reserve gold banking system, you end up with widespread bank failures. And that's when the calls go out and the people say, we really need someone to bail out or stabilize the banking system. This is how you recreate central banks. And this is in fact what historically happened roughly, and it could certainly happen again if we were to move back to a gold standard.
Yeah, I mean, with gold, if we did go back to a gold standard, there's only three things you can really do. And you have to do these three things while you're doing it. It's either freedom, security, or trust, right? You can hold it yourself. That's freedom. You can have the security of having, a third party hold it or whatever, or a bank or something like that. That's trust and security, but it costs money to do that. It costs you money. Or you can hand it over to the bank and them give you some paper notes back, and you have to have that trust. I choose freedom personally, but there's a cost to each one of them. If you don't have this stuff like I have, on me, on my person as freedom, I chose freedom. If I have it in the bank, I have to pay for that security. But if I don't have it in the bank and I have it here, the cost is something could happen to me. Somebody can come in here and do this stuff, whatever. You know what I mean? It's all a cost. You know what I mean? And it's very cumbersome to have these physical metals as a money. Again, it worked for years. If you take a look at this chart right here, this is basically the history of our money. You know what I mean? And, I'll probably make a video breaking this stuff down. You can pause it and look at it. But as you can see on the end, where we're headed to, technology always wins, man. You know what I mean? But I'll get into that at the end. So let's have them wrap up, and then we'll finish it off.
And by doing this is what you've done. You started off with something very nice and decentralized like gold, but because of its lack of portability and the difficulty of storage, you've eventually reinvented the paper banking system, and you've reinvented central banks. And in doing so, you put your money into the control of a very small group of people who may start out being very ethical and above board, but will eventually do very stupid and corrupt things and will be co-opted by the government to fund deficit spending, as we're seeing in the US and so many other countries now, where the central bank is complicit and works and colludes with the US Treasury to print up money, buy their debt, and thus fund endless wars and endless deficit spending, running up the national debt of the U.S. in the process. If you want to think more about these issues, I have a video about whether Bitcoin should be backed by something and the problems with backing currencies with digital commodities or physical commodities. So I'll put that link in the description notes below.
Again, guys, you heard that. Go ahead and go over to his channel, Bitcoin University, and subscribe. And again, I highly suggest you get off zero with Bitcoin. Go over there and learn something. I'm not here to change anybody's mind or try to convince anybody. I'm not. I'm here to plant a seed in your head, right? I can't tell you to, go buy Bitcoin and sell your gold, or, sell your silver, or take your fiat currency and buy some Bitcoin or whatever. I just can't tell you to do that. I'm not here to do that. I'm here to give you the information from a silver stacker's perspective while you're looking at this silver, right? Because here's what I know, guys, and this is the truth, right? Two things always win. Better technology always wins. I mean, it just does. I mean, you look at this light bulb I'm looking at. Electricity won out. The internet won out. That beats the books or whatever, the newspapers. Locomotives and cars beat horses. You name it. Better technology wins. And also, number two, hard money wins, right? It just does. The reason why gold and silver, again, here's this chart. The reason why gold and silver did so well versus commodities like food and stuff like that, because it's harder to get and it lasts longer. You cannot create or destroy gold or silver. You can't. It's God's money, and I love it. I absolutely love it. And for thousands of years, it's done its job. But its time is up now. You know what I mean? Gold and silver are not good money anymore. Not in this world. In the world we live in is, as I'm recording this, I'm recording on a digital phone that I carry around. It's a supercomputer that has more computing power than the computers that did the moon landing. You couldn't have told me that 30 years ago. You couldn't have told me 30 years ago, 40 years ago, whatever, that, if you have a business and you don't get on the internet, your business is going to fail. You know what I mean? Bitcoin is here for the new world, right? You need electricity, computing power, the internet, and software. And that's what Bitcoin is. Unfortunately, gold and silver doesn't fit in that world anymore. You know what I mean? I have silver as a backup now to Bitcoin, and also I'm a collector. I love silver, but it's not finite, and Bitcoin is. It's 21 million Bitcoin. That's it. But again, for the reasons he said and much more, I love gold just like everybody else. This is the only gold I have. But gold as a gold standard. And backing our dollar up, you cannot trust human beings to run a fiscal network. You just can't do it. It's failed every single time because we're too greedy. You make a big honey pot of stuff, and then we just start dipping in the honey as human beings. We don't have to trust human beings with Bitcoin. Bitcoin, I love this statement from them. It's don't trust, verify. And again, don't trust me, verify. Don't trust anything I say. Don't trust anything what anybody says. Don't ever trust a human being. Bitcoin is a network. You have to verify every single transaction. It's a network built of thousands and thousands of computers all around the world, and it's secured by code and math.
Bitcoin is a revolutionary technology that enables a new way to send payments over the internet. You can think of it as an open accounting system where thousands of computers all over the world work together to track ownership of digital tokens called bitcoins. When you send someone bitcoins, the transaction is broadcast to the entire network. After it's verified, it's recorded in a public ledger called the blockchain. The blockchain contains a record of every Bitcoin transaction that has occurred since the system began, and it's shared and maintained on the network, so everyone keeps the books, so to speak. Most currencies are issued by a central authority that controls the money supply. Bitcoin is a peer-to-peer system, so there is no central authority. Instead, Bitcoins are issued to users who help process transactions in the network. And this is how new Bitcoins are released into circulation. The system is programmed so that only 21 million Bitcoins will ever exist, and as time goes by, the mining reward decreases. The result is a predictable supply that's governed by scarcity, making Bitcoin somewhat like a digital gold. It's the first currency of the internet, and everyone is free to use it. With Bitcoin, you can send any amount of money to anyone, anywhere in the world, as easily as sending an email.
Human beings can't do that, ladies and gentlemen. Again, guys, I'm not here to bash gold. I promise you, I'm not. Obviously, I love precious metals, but in the 21st century, I think it's time to move on to the new money. And again, we appreciate the gold and silver, but we got to bow down to the new king, and that's Bitcoin. I love each and every one of you, and I'll talk to you soon. Peace and love, guys.